Welcome, champions, to the next overview and tier list ranking, featuring the newest champion. This is where we'll break down their mechanics and place them in my overall tier list for every champion in the game. So let's talk about Dynaheir, the lawful good human wizard in Seed 3, and serves your formation as a support and speed champion. She comes as a new addition to the Heroes of Baldur's Gate affiliation, and is tied very closely to her bodyguard Misc of the same crew. Her basic attack is nothing special, similar to Viconia of her affiliation, using a simple sling for 1 hit of damage. Her ultimate is more unique, cycling between 2 different 3rd level spells, Fireball and Lightning Bolt. Fireball will engulf the enemy's side of the screen, dealing 1 ultimate hit to all enemies and knocking them back. Lightning Bolt will cast through the enemy with the most health remaining, dealing ultimate damage in a wide line and stunning them for 5 seconds. All of her damage buffing comes from her formation ability, the Resolve of Rashomon. This is a multiplicative pre-stack buff, so it scales very well, though the pre-stack scaling is on the smaller side and requires a specialization pick. It will increase the damage of all champions in the formation with a constitution of 15 plus for each champion it affects. So that means not only does your DPS need to have 15 constitution, you want as many members of your formation, the full 10 ideally, to all have at least 15 constitution. While this is a very powerful buff, that also makes it quite restrictive. There are some tools that help, but we'll look into that in a minute. And at the end of the day, there are plenty of options that fall under that restriction. This is even further boosted by Defensive Position, which will increase the effect of the Resolve of Rashomon each time an ally is attacked, stacking up to a maximum of 100. These stack multiplicatively, and the base effect is increased if Misc is currently in your formation. If you can stack this up, the Resolve of Rashomon really becomes a potent buff, with 10 champions who qualify for the Constitution restriction slotted in your formation at 100 stacks of Defensive Position. She aids in the stacking of Defensive Position with the Unapproachable East, which will grant 25 Overwhelm to champions in the frontmost column if their Overwhelm wasn't already at least 25, essentially making them an off-tank. In another way to synergize with Misc, or really any champion with a favored foe mechanic, with Enemy of Thay, she marks humanoids as her favored foe, and has a 50% chance to spawn an additional red wizard with each wave in a non-boss area. This also becomes part of her speed mechanic in Spoils of War, where all favored foes have a chance to drop double quest items or count for double quest progression. So pairing her with as many favored foe utilizing champions can help her speed shine. Her specialization choices are rather unique actually, but for optimal performance you will be forced into her first pick. That first pick being Circle Magic. She helps champions qualify for her Resolve of Rashomon by increasing the constitution of champions that are adjacent to her by 1, while also increasing the base effect. This will always be the one you should go for, if you can, because not only does it make it easier to qualify, but that base bonus increase is entirely how you make her scale the pre-stack, as the equipment for her specializations will scale this up. Then she has Iron Lord's Justice, which will make champions deal more damage to all favored foes, not just her own. And lastly, she has Loyal Bodyguard, which will have Misc take the tank role, and make him eligible for the run with her if he wasn't otherwise available due to restrictions. His base health will be increased, scaling with how far you've progressed in your current run, and will also increase the health of other champions by 25% of his buffed maximum health. Her equipment is pretty good, 1 for all champ damage, 1 for her Resolve of Rashomon, though keep in mind this one is for her post-stack bonus, and Defensive Position to boost it further, 1 for her speed in Spoils of War, and 1 for her Specializations, which is how you scale her pre-stack, and lastly, Ultimate Cooldown. Her feats are good, about what you'd expect in buffing her formation abilities, her specializations, plus 10 to the Overwhelm buff for Unapproachable East, and a +1 to her Charisma, not bad, but you'll want to have those specialization feats on at all times if possible, as again, this will help her scale her pre-stack. So let's talk about her event, Fleetswake. This time around we have Dynaheir, Solok, and Desmond. All interesting options. It is Desmond's last year before being retired to only being accessible through time gates. But that doesn't really matter anymore, as this is the last event before the launch of Events 2.0, which will change up everything with how events work. I talked about this in my last video, but we'll go into greater detail when it actually happens. For now, know that Desmond is pretty good, but also in a very competitive seat, sharing it with the likes of Antreus, Crux, and Karlach. Solok is great in his niche, which is buffing ranged damage. Unless you're hard focusing a DPS that is ranged based, you'll probably want to look elsewhere. But if it is, and we're getting more ranged champions these days, he's a great option. And then of course our current Dynaheir, who is pretty good. Overall, I'd recommend focusing Dynaheir if you can make use of her Resolve of Rashomon. Now what about her achievement and adventure variants? Her achievement is fairly simple, requiring you to kill 10,000 red wizard enemies, with her in your formation. You can rely on her enemy of Thay for this, or specifically hunt them down in adventures like The Lost Love in the Tomb of Annihilation. For her variants, she is forced in your formation, but she can be moved in all of them. In the first, you can only use champions with a constitution of 15 or higher, so only those that qualify for the Resolve of Rashomon. The second will negatively affect you by increasing the quest requirements, and will also spawn a red wizard with every wave in a non-boss area. This leans into her favored foe speed mechanic, and is also an alright spot to farm up her achievement. Lastly, for her third variant, you are forced to use both Dynaheir and Misc, and you cannot use any tanking champions. This leads you to her third specialization choice to make Misc your active tank. Honestly, all of these should be very easy for all players. Her availability is really good actually. Naturally available for every day 1 trials restriction, while being usable for 3 of the 4 patrons naturally, and also available for the 4th with her attribute feat. And therefore opening up all that availability to Misc as well if you take that specialization choice. Now let's dissect her a little bit. While her buff is actually really good, it's not positional, which is a negative for a lot of formations these days, and it's restrictive. Also, she's a speed champion, but also shares a seat with both Nahara and BBEG, staples in speed formations. While her speed mechanic is at least different from the two of them, those two being very similar in that regard, can she scale it up enough to keep up with them? Questionable. Now, I'm going to reveal a very minor spoiler. So minor, I don't even think I need my spoiler zone text, because I think it's actually more important to know this about her than not. But if you still don't want to hear it, plug those ears for a moment. Minor spoiler zone. In the next Emergence event, coming February 28th, Dynaheir and Misc are gaining feats, purchasable with the Emergence currency, Corrupted Gems, that give them each a Ceramorphosis stack, like Nrak, Imoen, and Viconia, allowing them to synergize with the absolute adversaries of Baldur's Gate 3. This is big for a few reasons. For starters, there will now be the opportunity for a full 10 Ceramorphosis stacked formation for the first time ever. And you might be thinking, neat, she can make Misc a tank, so they get another tank. Not so much. Most of the absolute adversaries have 14 constitution, so you're going to have to take that first specialization to make them qualify for it to begin with. And again, her first specialization is how you make her pre-stack in the first place. But if we consider all of the Ceramorphosis champions available, as long as she can be adjacent to those who are 14, everyone but Viconia will qualify for her 15 constitution. So 9 in total, not too bad. But you could also slot in Jaheira instead of Viconia for that 10th constitution qualification, who may or may not be getting a Ceramorphosis of her own in the nearish future. The problem then comes down to working with Will's folk hero. We're gonna need some glitch feats, man. You know what? Screw it. Welcome to the big spoiler zone. While I consider the Ceramorphosis feats minor spoilers, I now want to briefly mention a major spoiler, so cover up those ears even harder. The next champion to release after Dynaheir is another member of the Absolute Adversaries. who will likely be the dedicated damage dealer of the crew. I won't go into any of the mechanics or reveals here, you can investigate that yourself if you choose to, but know that we're on the horizon of having more Ceramorphosis stacks than we know what to do with, or rather more options for restricted runs, and a legit potential new DPS to work with, something to keep in mind. And I'm hoping this one can squeeze into Will's folk hero in some unique ways, with an ability we don't know about yet or feats, because they might be a rough one to do that with based on race and class. Anyway, now back to the task at hand. Dynaheir is good, great availability, speed with favored foe synergy, pre-stack scaling buffing, though restrictive in Hushi buffs while not being positional, but still a great addition. I'm putting her in the A tier. Thanks for checking in. Stack up that like, sub, and bell, leave a comment on what you think of Dynaheir and all the Baldur's Gate shenanigans, and always remember, have a hell of a time out there, champion.